Je pense sans cesse à toi.
Well, hello and welcome to The Foretop, a roundtable discussion of today's hot-button topics in food and beverage. I'm your host, Catherine Cole. On today's show, we will nosh on 3 courses. First, we will kvetch about BS food words. Next, is flavor the new superfood? And for our third course, by curious about bycatch. Our esteemed panelists here in the studios of Oregon Public Broadcasting are Curt Ellis, the filmmaker behind the Peabody Award-winning documentary King Corn, and the co-founder and CEO of FoodCorps. Welcome, Curt.
Great to be here.
And Virginia Gewin, a journalist covering food security and crop diversity for publications such as Nature, Science, and Modern Farmer. Hi, Virginia.
Hi, Catherine.
And Ivy Manning, author of 5 cookbooks and contributor to national magazines such as Cooking Light and Fine Cooking. Hey, Ivy.
Hello.
Okay, let's bite into our first course and kvetch about some BS food words. What do words like ancient, artisanal, heirloom, or superfood really mean? In many cases, nothing. For our first course today, we're going to bitch about the food terms that we find to be most irritating. Virginia Gewin, as a trained scientist and science journalist, you must be acutely aware of how inaccurate many of today's most commonly used food terms are. Can you give us some examples of the worst offenders?
Sure. I walked through the market last night and took a look down the aisles at Super Flakes, Paleo Crunch, raw artisanal nut butters, all laden with different BS marketing buzzwords. And it's hard to differentiate those from the legit labels that actually have some meaning. So, the terms that are defined by the USDA and FDA, those actually mean something. GMO-free, organic, gluten-free. But the meaningless ones, the one that really drive me crazy, are when they've been co-opted to just be meaningless, like gluten-free meat or gluten-free water or low-fat candy. Those are really just egregious.
The one I'm kind of sick of is farm fresh, where it's like, these eggs are farm fresh. It's like, yeah, which is to say they weren't frozen eggs. Like, that's a thing. Everybody just wants to convince you that what you're getting is somehow coming from a far more beautiful-looking place and a far more sustainable-looking farm than it actually is.
So there's 2 types of BS buzzwords that really make my eyes roll. And it seems like they're you can group them into 2 categories. There's the old terms like natural or artisan that used to have a definition. They used to have a meaning, but that's been lost over time. Artisanal used to mean skills mastery and apprenticeship and a guild. But that doesn't exist anymore. But the carryover still seems to mean something to people. I mean, even 50% of the bean-to-bar chocolate makers use that term on their bars now. But
oh, wait a minute. Does everyone remember the Mast Brothers in Brooklyn? Yeah. They were not bean to bar. But go ahead. Sorry.
But that's just the case in point. Like, you can say it is artisan. You can use any of these terms. Natural, again, has no clear definition from the feds, although they're changing that now. But those are the old terms that still resonate with people. They have some meaning to people. It just isn't – there's no definition of it.
Well, I think there is one definition for artisanal. I think you have to have a beard.
That's right.
You must have
yes.
a beard if you're making a product, then it's artisanal.
Yeah, and I think they tested out like artisanal versus expensive on a food label, and like expensive didn't work as well from a marketing standpoint.
That didn't test well.
I think there was a Car Talk joke once that was something about what they really should label food with is, this was grown by a trust funder in Vermont with very earnest intentions.
Yeah, and no irony involved whatsoever.
Everyone would buy it,
Right. Natural definitely frosts my natural cake because it's the belief you have as a consumer is that you are actually getting a superior product.
Right.
Where all it means if you're buying meat that is natural, that means that after it was killed, it was not doused in antibiotics and hormones or additives or coloring or natural and artificial flavoring before it was put in the package for you. There is a term that the USDA has defined, which is naturally raised, which does mean that the meat was raised without hormones and antibiotics added to it during the time of production. But that is totally conflated by consumers who have no idea what they're looking at. They think, like, it's natural. It must mean it was raised outdoors on a beautiful farm by beautiful people.
And Curt, that made me think of eggs from vegetarian-fed chickens, which is impossible because chickens are omnivores. So you don't want a vegetarian-fed chicken. That's the last thing you want to eat.
I have 2 chickens in my backyard, and I guarantee you they are not vegetarian-fed, but they are really happy, healthy, awesome chickens that lay amazing eggs. It's a problematic world we live in.
All right, who else has some good food terms for us? Ivy, do you have some for us?
Actually, years ago, I wrote a book called The Farm to Table Cookbook, and it was about how to eat through the seasons and how to shop best and keep foods from, say, your Saturday market fresh all week and what to do with them. And then very shortly after that, farm to table started popping up everywhere. Yeah, it's on, fast food. Eventually, yes, there is a factory farm somewhere that was grown. And then, yes, it does end up on your table, but the meaning has sort of been lost. We want to think that there's this happy farmer that, delivered it directly to our table, but that's not usually the case.
Never.
Unless you're shopping at farmers markets. So, yeah, farm to table bugs me now.
Understandable.
I can see why that would be.
The newer terms, the ones like superfood and ancient, I have a love-hate relationship with ancient. What grain isn't ancient, really? But at the same time, ancient Cheerios are out there now. And at least there is some diversity in what we're eating. And people are encouraged to explore quinoa and teff and einkorn and farro. And for diversity and for someone that really is writing a lot about the need to diversify our food system for food security, it's kind of a winner, but it's still all grains are ancient.
Well, it's important for grains to be ancient and for them to come in odd numbers. So you have 5 grain,
Yes.
7 grain, and 9 grain.
Oh, yeah.
But never the 2 grain, 4 grain, or 6 grain.
Well, and what's the thing with multigrain? I'm such a sucker for multigrain. And then it doesn't say if it's completely refined or not. And so you're like, wow, how could this be so white and pure and yet be multigrain? You know what? It probably would have been healthier to just get a single grain that's, in its rawest form.
The one that really I think is kind of underappreciated by folks is the way orange juice is marketed to us. The squeezed from fresh oranges language means something radically different from fresh squeezed. So when you go buy a bottle of Tropicana, you think you are buying something that looks like the picture on the label, which is the beautiful tree and the farmer picking the orange and the orange sliced in half and juice squirting out of it. When in reality, what you may well be buying is something that has been deoxygenated and been stored in an above-ground tank for as much as a year and then reconstituted with flavor packs that technically came from orange oils and their natural flavors made out of oranges originally. But they're basically chemical compounds that make it taste like orange juice again when what you're drinking has been there for up to a year. And this, was all this elaborate marketing ploy to get us out of the orange juice from concentrate world and into something that might be more profitable for orange juice companies. So they sell us this thing that is in many ways just old orange juice or orange juice concentrate in a different form, but it's wildly more profitable for the companies that sell it, which are all owned by the big soda companies ultimately.
So that's why those fresh squeezed cocktails are so good, because you're actually seeing them squeeze the fruit in front of you. It's not all that wonderful liquor. It's the juice, right?
Right, absolutely. It's all those plant esters.
Yeah.
All natural with the vodka.
That's making me so sad, Curt, to hear this about orange juice.
It seems like it's like the purest childhood memories, and it was this healthy thing, part of a complete breakfast. But, it's just as sugary and manipulated as the fruit O's that we were eating.
What do you guys think of the product Just Mayo, which is not mayo? Have you guys seen that?
Yeah, it's a super interesting concept. We do live in a world where animal agriculture is extraordinarily hard to do both affordably and abundantly. And so this company, Hampton Creek, out of California, which is like a tech startup with a lot of tech startup minds behind it, and a lot of tech startup investors behind it too, is trying to create foods like mayonnaise and cookie dough without using eggs. So they're doing things like using pea protein and stuff. And the mayonnaise is delicious.
Yeah,
So
from a
that.
chef's perspective, I can tell you that it is actually really delicious. And they're coming out with
really?
interesting flavors. And it is somehow eggy. And it's a little bit lower in fat, and but just as high in protein. So lower in cholesterol, I believe, because of the lack of egg yolks. And it's quite good.
Yeah,
was
I
surprised.
think
But it's not mayo.
No, but well, yeah. So there was a big lawsuit where like the Best Foods people got all worked up and said, "You can't market this thing as mayonnaise. We're suing you." And the American public wised up quickly. I think it was like, "You guys are idiots, Best Foods. Like this tastes like mayo. It counts as mayo."
Oh, I don't know. I prefer the real thing. Hey, Virginia, did we go over the term small batch? I always wonder what that means. Is that
Just
something?
small batches.
As small as you choose to define it.
It's like a nano brew, it's just, it means like the goodness is going to be captured in every morsel.
So basically nothing.
No.
Okay, I got a couple I got to share. One is sell-by dates. I mean, that's not really a food term, but I always ignore them, especially with things like yogurt are fine a few days after the sell-by date. And then
No, I know what to get you for Christmas. It's great.
Oh, yeah. And then I have to throw a wine one in because I'm a wine person. The word reserve, I always run the opposite direction when I see the word reserve. In Europe, in some places, it has a meaning that has to do with the number of months the wine has aged in barrel at the winery. But in the United States, it means nothing other than we can charge you more for this wine.
Really? That's interesting. I think I've been suckered into that one.
Or, well, it can also mean we put it in really expensive barrels, which I don't like the flavor of smoky new barrels at all. So once again, I just avoid reserve.
The thing that's kind of meaningless that goes nicely with reserve wine is Angus beef. It's like a steak that comes from a cow that is at least 51% black in color is like one of the main definition points of getting Angus beef. Not a huge flavor difference for me. And there's, in fact, a lot of other beef cows out there that are more flavorful than Angus beef, but it's got the better marketing budget. So Angus beef is what Americans request.
All right, well, I think it's time to move on here, but we're going to take a quick break. And actually, I'm going to show you something, guys. And you, Ivy, can you tell me, speaking of words on labels, can you read anything on this label to me?
Okay, I'm going to guess it's Basque because there's lots of X's.
Excellent.
It's
excellent.
It's a bottle of rosé wine, and it has a very sexy label, and it's Guetaraiko Chocolina.
Oh my gosh, she's a pro. That's right. We're having a little sip while we are talking to you, and we are sipping some Basque rosé. I think it's delicious. What do you guys think?
I love it. It's got a little sparkle to it. It's a nice, late morning, early morning, mid-afternoon,
It's my favorite mid-afternoon.
late night wine. Yeah,
Perfect bathrobe drinking, I think.
And,
absolutely. Yeah, to just put one of these next to the shower. Great.
and Ivy, I'm so impressed. You were able to pronounce it on first read. You must be
I'm-
familiar with Basque country.
No, I'm just a really good BSer when it comes to wine lists.
Okay, I have to read this word because I'm just so impressed. It's T-X-A-K-O-L-I-N-A. Chacolina is the place. Chacoli is the kind of wine. We happen to be drinking a rosé, but I highly recommend it. It's very refreshing, especially when you are talking on a microphone.
It has notes of all-natural wellness.
Now for our second course, which ties in very nicely with our first topic because it hones in on the flagrant misuse of the term natural flavorings. There's a new school of thought that says we have been focused on the wrong words like sugar and fat, in our fight against the obesity epidemic, or should I say pandemic, now that it's becoming a worldwide problem. Perhaps the word that will return us all to good health is flavor. Curt Ellis, you are our resident expert on the disconnect between big food and nutrition, so I'm going to throw this topic your way first. Why would flavor be good for you, and what do we need to know about this?
Well, there was a book that came out a while ago called The Dorito Effect that that kind of introduced this argument into the mainstream, and I think it's a really interesting one. Basically posits that as agriculture has become more industrialized, and we've gotten better at growing food in massive quantities or growing food that is super shelf stable, we've actually lost both flavor and nutrients, which are interconnected, from the food. And so we make up for that lost flavor by pumping our food full of really incredibly delicious but also nutritionally hollow flavor. And I see a lot of logic to it in the work I do at FoodCorps. We are a national program as a nonprofit. We go into low-income schools and work to connect kids to healthy food. And if you go into a FoodCorps school, you will see like kids roaming the hallways with these Takis, like little Takis are like the new Cheetos, basically. They're like little rolled-up tortilla strips that are bright red and like – as far as flavor explosions go, this is like a nuclear bomb going off in your mouth. I mean, they're just like a dozen different ingredients that are all about MSG, natural flavor, artificial flavor, red and yellow coloring, and it's just meant to like get you hopped up on snacks. And like we're hardwired to kind of love that stuff because in our like ancestral memory, flavor is connected to nutrition, and yet when we get flavor these days, it comes out of a Taki bag, not out of something that actually would be healthy for us to eat, that is a much simpler whole food version of the thing. So I was just talking to a FoodCorps service member who took a sort of Taki approach to taking jicama and putting dried chili flakes on it with fresh lime. And her kids loved it, and they actually like started an anti-Taki campaign in their school that the kids then led. So I think like we can get back to a way of eating that is more about simple food, simply prepared, and full of flavor. But it's going to require us to forsake some of the things that are honestly really delicious but are just empty calories.
And we are in a hub here in Oregon for the return of flavor to food and farming, and that has been really amazing to watch unfold. There's a thing called the Culinary Breeding Network that comes out of Oregon State University, and these guys are getting chefs in the field to taste and help them select varieties that have different qualities that they want to have in food, that they want to use and prepare with in their recipes. And having been to a couple of the tastings that are coming out of this work, it's just phenomenal. It's really amazing. Nutrition is coming back in. When you compare what they're breeding to what's on the market, it's just unreal. So and it's not just Oregon. There are lots of pockets like this popping up all over the U.S. The problem is there's no funding. So whatever's happening is just really on a shoestring budget. And it's really up to the hipster breeder who's freelance out in the field that cares that's doing this right now. There's no money for it.
Yeah, you see it through like Seed Savers Exchange and their amazing work getting folks to save heirloom seeds and trade them around and bring them back in abundance. And you see it with Slow Food USA's Arc of Taste and the Slow Food International Arc of Taste program, these efforts to like find the food products that are really unique to a place and a culture and that have been largely untouched by the industrialization of our food supply, and to really hold those things up and celebrate them again. And, those are the most delicious meals ultimately, and they're incredibly good for you.
Ivy, I'm curious what your perspective is as someone who cooks for a living.
I thought it was really interesting in Mark Schachtker's book. He talks about, if you're presenting people that grew up on Doritos or what have you, and you say you need to eat more vegetables. You've got this, dietitian saying, you have diabetes now and you need to eat more vegetables. But you let them loose in a big box grocery store and all there is watery lettuce and apples that are, cryovac and don't taste like anything. It's really hard to convince that public that those are the foods they need to eat. So if the foods – part of his argument, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, Curt, is that, if the food tastes great and it's healthy, it's much more easy to crave that. You want more of that. And there's a natural stopgap. Raspberries are great, but you're not going to, go nuts on them like you would a bag of Doritos and just stuff it in your face, because there's sort of this natural stopgap that just says, okay, that's enough. I've had enough of that food I'm good. And then it's portion control, but it's done by your gut, the intelligence of your own gut. That's amazing to me.
Yeah, that's something we discovered when we were making our documentary King Corn. We were talking with the head of the Harvard School of Public Health, and he was explaining that there's something about the way high fructose corn syrup is processed in the body where it doesn't generate the same stop signals of helping you recognize that you just ate 8 tablespoons of sugar and you're about to keel over. You just keep drinking it. And like that's how we end up with the 72-ounce soda as a thing. And, you know, people love sitting around drinking those while watching our movie in the theater. And it's because our bodies don't really recognize that we've just had a really incredible amount of calories.
Another really interesting article I read maybe a few years ago was by Kate Crater at Food and Wine magazine, and she goes to the best restaurants in the country. And she wrote an article kind of like, what's happening to our taste buds? Everybody is constantly flavor blasted and overwhelmed to the point where we're raising kids who don't really have a balance of palate. So things that really would have been, you know, delicious to us won't be to them because they don't taste like Chockies or whatever those are. I'm wondering if those chips are Basque.
Ivy, I find what you just said so interesting because this book, The Dorito Effect, that we've all read by Mark Schatzker, I loved his point that children actually, if you kind of let them loose in the wild, and he actually cited this sort of bizarre study in like 1939 where this scientist basically took a bunch of toddlers from their families and raised them like wolves in her house. But anyway, she just let them choose whatever foods they wanted. And she proved that children have an innate need to eat what will nourish them and make them incredibly healthy. And so kids were choosing to eat liver and broccoli and all these kinds of things. And then another example I found really interesting was sailors in the 18th century dying of scurvy were just craving, you know, roots and berries and wild vegetables, wild fennel. It's just fascinating. If we listen to our bodies, they will lead us in the right direction. Unfortunately, there's this fake flavor that keeps leading us astray.
Well, there's well-documented evidence to suggest that diet sodas, artificial sweeteners, are making us fat as well. There's actually a correlation that, like, you then crave things that are extra super sweet, and it's hard to lose weight when you're craving sweet all the time because your litmus test of what sweet is so much sweeter than natural sweeteners, if that makes sense.
It makes me so sad that there's a whole generation of kids that will never taste what a real tomato tastes like. I mean, I grew up in the South, and my grandmother's tomatoes were amazing and mouthwatering and beefy and unreal, and I can't find them now. My daughter's never had one, and I would kill for some of those seeds, even if I could just have them now to just plant myself. And it's not something you never thought about back then.
It doesn't mean it's lost for good, though. I think, you know, there's so much reason for hope, you know, to look at that same school where the Takis were all you could find in the hall to now have an incredibly vibrant school garden in that place and kids growing their own food there, and to have the kids themselves taking on a campaign to say, we don't want to be a school that don't like our kids are only eating Takis. We want to like retake control over our food future and do something that is ultimately going to be healthier for us than, you know, partially hydrogenated soybean oil, which is a lot of what's in those things.
Curt, I agree with you. I think there is a lot of hope because honestly, I'm looking around the room, I'm just guessing about age. If you grew up in the 70s and 80s, it was all about Swanson and I mean, we weren't talking about heirloom gardens. Our grandmothers might have had them, but we weren't talking about it. And now it's coming into the schools and we are talking about it. I've overheard conversations, albeit in my Portland bubble, in grocery stores where a 4-year-old is trying to convince her mom to buy more kale. So things are changing quickly, and there is hope.
Actually, there were new FDA nutrition labels unveiled as of May. I don't know if anyone saw those. I wish that they had included something about flavor that is actually inherent in the food rather than added artificial flavorings. But that's a step in the right direction, I think. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I mean, nutrition labels, they're always inherently problematic because they're inherently reductionist. You know, you like take food that is this incredibly complex thing and you try to break it down into a dozen different named vitamins and minerals that you're and properties that you're either getting too much of or not enough of. And it asks us to think about food in a scientific way rather than a holistic way. And I think you need some science, and you also need much more of a holistic view than we have. And so, when FoodCorps is educating kids about what a healthy diet looks like, we're not rattling off the information you see on the back of nutrition labels. For the most part, we're saying eat real food, eat the rainbow of fruits and vegetables, get things of a lot of different colors and a lot of different textures, and try new things that taste interesting and different to you. Eat food that you yourself have grown or cooked. And that gets you further often than trying to parse out the individual nutritional components of what you're eating. Though I don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater, it's incredibly important for us to pay attention to the way in which added sugars in particular, refined grains in particular, added fats have come into our food supply in just a fire hose kind of quantity. And we need to start paying attention to how we could get those things out of our diets.
I think it's time to move on to our third course. And I think we need to talk about yet another food term. We're going to stay with the semantic theme here. This is a term we all need to know. It's bycatch. That's all one word, and it's a portmanteau, B-Y-C-A-T-C-H. This is a sustainable seafood term that we should all be using, apparently. Ivy Manning, your work brings you into close contact with the seafood markets, I bet. So help us out here. What is bycatch, and what should our listeners know about it?
Well, there's three things that happen when you're out on a commercial fishing boat. The fishermen are out there for their target catch. Let's give the example of Alaska. They're out there to gill net or line catch salmon, wild salmon. That's what they're after. Anything that's caught incidental to that, and that happens quite a bit, is either, it's often dead in the gill nets or on the line, or it's injured, and it usually gets tossed back into the ocean because it's not their target catch. So it's discarded catch. And then there's another sort of subset of that some chefs are moving towards for sustainability, and that's incidental catch. So it's not the target fish that the fishermen went out for, but it's brought to land anyway, and it's sold often to restaurants that are aware that this is a good thing to do, because otherwise these fish get thrown back into the ocean and they die. Just to give you one little factoid, for every 1 pound of shrimp that Americans, wild shrimp that are caught, 7 pounds of bycatch gets thrown back into the ocean, and most of it dies. Oh. And we're not just talking little fishies that you've never seen before and are scary looking and wouldn't want on your plate. We're talking about seagulls and seals and even beluga whales die, and dolphins at the hand of bycatch. And we're really starting to work, hoping that chefs can work with fishermen to find, take whatever you get that day. And there's things like a CSA, sort of a community-supported agriculture, but it's a CSF, so it's community-supported fisheries. And what they're doing is chefs are working with fishermen and agreeing to buy a certain amount of catch, whatever it is that day, and then dealing with it. So it might be tuna one day and they're really happy about it, but then the next day they get something like a paddle-nosed dogfish or something, and then they've got to figure out a way to cook it deliciously, inform their patrons, hey, this is really good fish. Yes, it's not what you're familiar with, but it's really delicious. So there are really great organizations starting to sprout up in America, and certain cities like Houston and New Orleans, for instance.
I've seen has a lot of that. I just wondered, is that something that on the West Coast? I haven't really seen much of that, though. No, there isn't. I haven't seen. I've seen particular instances of it. I know a chef who had octopus on his menu, and I gave him what for about it. And I said, I refuse to eat that. They're very slow gestation, and in a lot of places endangered. And he's serving Pacific octopus. And he said, oh yeah, well, I buy it from the fisherman who's also selling me the crabs. The Pacific octopus are smart, and they go onto the crab pot and try to get this captured animal in the crab pot. And then when they pull up the crab pot,
guess who's smarter now?
yeah. And he had to have a one-on-one conversation with his fisherman about that and say, I will buy any octopus you can bring me within limit, and we'll serve it. But
I have another West Coast example. We have an awesome FoodCorps alum who served with us connecting kids to healthy food in school a couple of years ago, and she decided to pursue a career in school food service and be a cool lunch lady. And she wound up at Monterey Unified School District in California, like this incredible marina town that's been focused on the fishery industry forever. But one of the projects she's been working on is an effort that works across Monterey Unified and now Oakland Unified also to take a bycatch fish that fishermen off Monterey Bay are catching all the time, grenadier, which is called the squirrel of the sea by some people. It's like not a particularly attractive fish.
It has such a great name,
and turn it into fish tacos, grilled fish tacos that are now being served at scale across Monterey Unified School District and Oakland Unified School District. And it turns out to be this incredibly flaky and delicious white fish, but it was a bycatch fish that was not being used. And because we've never heard of it, there was no real market for it in the supermarket or restaurant world. So it's a fish that, fishermen were getting 25 cents a pound for it. So they were like, screw this, just throw them back in the sea, dead. Now they're able to elevate that price. So ultimately it ends up, being a $5 a pound cost to the school district to get this really high quality, flaky, white, tasty fish that the kids love. And it's much more sustainable than trying to make the same fish tacos happen at that kind of scale with normal fish.
Well, Curt, that brings up a good point about scale, too. We as consumers can buy, smaller fish, but it's not very common to see it in fish markets. Whereas places like Dock to Dish in L.A., and now there's one in New York, are selling on a larger scale to restaurants that can really take care of the bycatch problem. In that case, it's a much larger scale. So, go to restaurants that are proud to serve bycatch. Sometimes it's called trash fish, but I think there's been some pretty good PR movement to get that changed.
Yeah, don't order the shrimp cocktail. Order the squirrel of the sea trash fish cocktail.
Right. Wait, Ivy, can I ask you a criminal question? You're gonna tell me I'm crazy, but if you're making something like, I'm thinking about restaurants, like how do they plan ahead for whatever bycatch comes in the door? So if you're planning to make a cioppino or a paella, can you just throw any fish in there?
Yeah, largely you just have to understand what, there's a very big difference between a dogfish and, say, sole. I mean, one's very delicate and one's a big, beefy, meaty fish. So most well-educated chefs can kind of just take a gander at the fishy and know how to cook it. Good chefs know how to do that. And I think it hopefully will spread to home consumers. There is like one difficulty in this in that Americans like what they know. So they want to know, it's shrimp, it's salmon, it's tuna, it's tilapia. I know what that is. But when you are saying, hey, we've got a jolthead porgy on the menu, or for instance, like bluefish, which is fishy tasting, we as cookbook food writers and cookbook authors, in my case, I think we really need to help educate people and also make them less afraid of bones and fins and heads. Fish come with those.
Fish, don't you?
Yeah. We're so used to the boneless, skinless chicken breast that it just reminds me of the Gary Larson cartoon of it's the boneless chicken ranch, and there's just all these chickens laying flat on the ground.
Oh my god!
We have to get used to the fact
chickens.
that these, we're beasts. They were beasts of the sea, and now we're eating them. So get used to it. I mean, there are different sizes, and not everything is sort of this hermetically sealed, perfect little white piece of fish with panko on it.
Ivy, do you think that chefs are really and cookbook writers and all of the people that play that role as the interface between the food system and the consumer, do you feel like they're embracing this role as educator? I mean, it's something that I see over and over again is falling to this group is, invasive species, coming up with recipes and trying to educate people about invasives, bycatch, and they're really, a lot of them taking it on and running with it and just really trying to use that as an education tool. But is it something that's widespread, or is it, are there people that are reluctant to just have to play this role and say, hey, I just want to be a chef?
Well, I mean, yeah, there are plenty of chefs that don't get into the battle because they've got a 12-hour day and they've got enough to worry about. And then there's also the issue in the kitchen of having to train someone to maybe dispatch a fish that they're not familiar with. But like my grandfather always said, guts is guts. So when we would go fishing, he taught me how to gut a fish, and then it just after that it kind of follows. So I think it is pretty amazing that chefs are jumping on board. And quite frankly, it's good for the menu. It's good for the pocketbook to sell it that way. I mean, in New York, the Dock to Dish program has 15 restaurants, top line restaurants that are on board with the CSF program, and they've got a waiting list.
Nice.
So chefs are seeing that this looks good on a menu, and people do care. They want to do the right thing. It just has to be delicious.
There's a long history anyway of dishonest chefs packaging fish up as if it were something else and selling it as a higher value fish back to customers. So this is a chance to go above board and actually get credit for it, which is pretty fantastic.
Yeah. It's fantastic. There's other challenges. I mean, you've got to convince a fisherman who looks in the water, pulls up his gill net. I was in Alaska and this dogfish came up with some of the salmon, and he was going to throw it back. It's a beautiful fish, and I said, no, we're going to fry that up. And he said, well, why? To him, every fish was, amount of money. And that's not going to make him any money. So we need to figure out systems where, these fish aren't going to a gigantic warehouse. They're smaller systems where they're being delivered and getting to the middlemen and explaining that we want these fish and we'll pay a little bit more for them. So it's like a three-pronged thing. There's what's on the plate and who's consuming it. Do they understand? Do the waiters and the cooks understand? Does the fisherman understand? And the guy in the middle, too.
I'd also like to do a quick shout out to a nonprofit called Sea Share in Alaska, where Alaskan fishermen donate their bycatch to food banks, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
Well, with that, I think we are ready for some dessert. How about we go around and each share a little something we're thinking about this week? I will go first. I guess I was thinking about semantics, and this kind of ties in what Curt mentioned a minute ago about chefs pushing fish by other names. I got kind of caught up in the history of trash fish being renamed to appeal to consumers, and I just wanted to read some of these to you because I was having so much fun reading about these. Orange Ruffy. Does anyone know what Orange Ruffy used to be called? Slimehead. Chilean sea bass. Anyone? Toothfish. Which I guess it had teeth, which is kind of scary. Sea urchin, which is called uni if you go to a Japanese sushi restaurant. Fishermen used to call it whore's eggs. That's nice. Yeah. And peaky toe crab. I love that name. It's so cute. It used to be mud crab, which is sort of lame. And then also I stumbled across this nugget a couple centuries ago, lobster, which frankly, I like lobster okay, but I've always considered it to be kind of a large bottom-feeding insect, frankly. There was so much lobster that no one wanted it, so they used to feed it to prisoners. All right, who's got the next dessert item? Ivy, would you like to go ahead?
Yeah, I've noticed in highfalutin restaurants, especially Spanish tapas restaurants, they're now serving seafood right out of the can. Often it's packed in olive oil, and they serve it with crackers and a little fork, and it's just sort of this shabby chic kind of way of serving really good small fish. So I've taken to doing that at home. So I put out baguette and maybe some Marcona almonds and a nice Spanish red, and then a little bit of tuna belly or little sardines in the can. And it's kind of a fun little, for entertaining, it's a fun way to present seafood.
And this isn't just any can, let's be clear. Where do you get this kind of thing? At a fine gourmet grocery?
Yes, I'm looking at gourmet grocery stores and, packed in olive oil, and it's probably not going to go over so well with like bumblebee, but like really good sardines or really good anchovies can be a thing of glory on the plate.
That's a great idea. How about you, Virginia?
Well, bananas are ruined for me, basically. I went to Malaysia for 2 weeks last month and was with a team, basically the USDA equivalent in Malaysia, and we were collecting wild bananas in order to conserve diversity before it's lost forever. And while I was there, I got to try at least 4 of the dozen of different banana varieties that are on the market. And they're amazing. My favorite was a little sweet, creamy 3-inch number called the 40-day ripe. And we'll never get it here because it is not shippable, like the Cavendish, which is the only banana that we really have access to here in the States. And sadly, the Cavendish is the blandest of the bunch.
Aw. How about you, Curt? What do you got?
I'm just in the middle of the best week of my year, which is the nonprofit that I lead called FoodCorps is just kicking off our big national orientation. So we have 215 amazing, passionate young people who have come together for a week of training before they set off to low-income schools around the country where they're going to teach kids what healthy food is and work with farmers and food service workers to improve school meals and do a bunch of work to create a new kind of culture of health in schools across the country. And there's just nothing better than meeting these 215 people who are volunteering their time and throwing themselves at the challenge of creating a fundamentally different relationship to food for kids to whom that means everything.
What a nice note to finish on. Thank you. A special thanks to all of you panelists, Curt Ellis, filmmaker and CEO, of course, of FoodCorps, Virginia Gewin, science journalist, Ivy Manning, cookbook author and magazine writer. You guys were awesome. Thank you.
Thanks.
Hey, folks, please pull up a chair to our table and subscribe to The Four Top on iTunes or however you get your podcasts. We're at facebook.com/The4Top, where you can join the conversation and suggest topics for us to discuss. That is after you like our page, of course. And please tweet us. We're at @4Top, all one word. Today's show was recorded at Oregon Public Broadcasting in the high-fiber, protein-packed city of Portland, Oregon. Our show editor and co-producer is Alex Ward. Special thanks to OPB sound supervisor Stephen Cray. Our music was performed by the incomparable wine importer Kermit Lynch. I hope you can join us for our next episode, and please tell your friends about the Four Top and give us some loving feedback in iTunes. Ciao!
Nuit blanche, nuit blanche, nuit blanche.
Did anyone leave a tip?